Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to Drums and Drams. My name is Cameron, and today we're going to be taking a look at the newest Booker's release to hit shelves. This is batch 2021-02, Tagalong Batch. All right, so like I said, today we're going to be taking a look at this Tagalong Batch, the newest release from Booker's and the second batch to hit shelves here in 2021. Now, before we get into the video, I need to put a quick disclaimer here at the beginning. Many of you who are familiar with the channel, who sort of know my palate, probably know what I'm about to say, and that is that Booker's is not typically one of my favorite whiskeys. And this is for a couple of reasons. First off, I am not a big fan of whiskeys that have really heavy, dry, sharp peanut notes. And I find that nowadays, a lot of Booker's releases tend to have this going on. And so because of that, I just don't find myself reaching for them so much. Now, if that is the case with this batch or with any whiskey that I review, I do my best to identify that as a very subjective tasting note and to not let that cloud my judgment of the overall profile of the whiskey, the overall drinkability, construction, all of that kind of stuff. So I do my best to keep it as objective as possible, but I will always call out the fact that that doesn't really, sort of agree with my palate. Now, the other thing I should say about this, and the reason that I don't find myself reaching for Booker's so much these days, is just because of the quality control and sort of the decline in batch quality over the last couple of years. So a few months ago, as part of my weekly Thursday night live stream series, I did a Booker's blind tournament where I had viewers send in a lot of different samples of batches, and I threw them into a sort of bracket pool, and I did a bunch of head-to-heads to see who came out on top. And what this revealed to me is that the rumors are true, that older batches of Booker's tend to be significantly better than some of the newer stuff. So 2015, 2017, these were incredible years for Booker's. And as you get into 2019 and 2020, things really start to dwindle. So I really started drinking Booker's in 2020. That's when I started kind of familiarizing myself with the brand. Granny's batch was sort of a peanut fest. It was a hot mess for me. Boston batch, lukewarm, hit or miss. I just thought it was a little bit unexciting, a little bit predictable. I don't know. The third batch, Pigskin batch, is probably my favorite of that year. It was, decent. But then as we get into 2021, we're starting to look at this, which is Donahoe's batch. Now, I put out a review of Donahoe's batch. I actually gave it a pretty good review. It's the most watched video on the channel, which is kind of hilarious to me because Booker's is just so not my thing. But I gave it a pretty good review. I found some interesting candied strawberry notes in there. It wasn't too peanut forward. But over time, this thing has opened up. It's kind of reverted to a more traditional baking spice, peanut, heat Booker's profile. Still has some fruity sweetness in there, but it's just a little less exciting. It's actually developed like a wet newspaper note for whatever reason. So if I could go back and redo that review, I would definitely add a few comments there, but that's neither here nor there. So let's go ahead and get to today's review, the Tagalong Batch. The first thing I'm going to do is give you some stats here, get a nose taste and evaluate it, and then I will compare it to this Donahoe's batch just to kind of see how these things stack up against each other. So a quick rundown of this brand new Tagalong Batch. We have a slightly higher proof than the previous release. This is coming in at 63.95%, so a pretty solid proof. The one thing that scares me here is the age. We've dropped about 6 months in age, so this batch is now coming in at 6 years, 5 months exactly. So a little under 6.5 years old. That's not uncommon for Booker's, but it is definitely younger than the last batch, and we'll see if that has any impact. I think that's all we need to talk about. Last thing I'll say, I love the green color of the label, and I love the baby blue color of the Donahoe's label. I think the new bright colored labels are awesome for Booker's. Small comment, but I've just got to give them credit where credit is due. Let's get to it and check out this batch here on the nose. All right, so the first thing I should say here is that this is a really, really hot batch of Booker's on the nose. The first thing that hits you is just a really strong ethanol, characteristic. The alcohol just crawls right up your nose, and a lot of people would just sort of smell this thing and say, this sucks, this is a hot mess, and I totally understand that. Part of me even wants to say that right away, but I'm going to keep going here. I'm going to try to get beneath that alcohol layer and see what else we have in the glass. All right, so when you come back to the nose here and you sort of acclimate to the proof, you really start to get into a wide variety of things. The first thing that hits me is, again, that traditional baking spice note that you get in a lot of these Booker's batches. Cinnamon, nutmeg, and this batch in particular, I'm getting a little bit of clove as well. But there's also sort of this underlying sweetness to this. It almost seems like you took a Booker's batch and poured sugar in it. And you can really smell a rich sort of cane sugar note, brown sugar note, and also a really strong vanilla is going on in here. So I don't know, once you get beneath that ethanol, there's a little bit more going on than sort of the first nosing would suggest. Yeah, I really like when a whiskey has a range of light and dark aromas and flavors going on in there. And as this thing is continuing to open up, I'm finding more and more of that balance, which is nice. I mean, yes, when you first nose it, it seems like it's very bright and very hot. And maybe that is what it is. And maybe I'm looking too deeply into this, but I'm getting a lot of milk chocolate now. I'm getting a little bit of a barrel char note, some of those pie crust type notes, a hint of dark cherry, although this is definitely not a fruit forward batch by any means. It's more of a traditional bourbon profile with baking spices and stuff like that. But, you know, I'm finding a nice duality of light and dark flavors here. So I'm going to nose this one more time before we get to the palate. And the last thing I should say here is just that the rye spice or the rye component of this whiskey is really, really active. And I don't know if that's because it's sort of a flavor that they were blending for, that they were going for, or if it's a result of the youth and sort of the heat of the whiskey. I find that with very alcohol-forward whiskeys, sort of lighter notes mingle with that ethanol and they become more pronounced. So for instance, in this case, vanilla, even though it's not a spicy note, it's sort of a lighter note. And I think that's really coming out here. I get the same effect on the Alberta Premium Cask Strength Rye. That's a very spicy and hot whiskey. It's got a lot of an ethanol kick to it, which makes the vanilla stand out and the rye spice stand out. That's the effect I'm getting here on this batch of Booker's. The vanilla is definitely coming out, but the rye spice is so active. I'm getting a little bit of greenness from the rye spice, a little bit of sort of like green apple. I'm getting some grassiness, a slight herbaceous note. It's not strong, and I don't want you to think I'm reviewing a rye whiskey here or anything like that, but look for it in the glass. Look for a little bit of those green notes because of how the ethanol is interacting with the different flavors in here. So that's the last thing I should say. Again, a pretty nice combination of light and dark, although it's overshadowed by the heat just a little bit. Many of you out there who are chasing high proofs and chasing intense whiskeys might really enjoy that, and some of you might not. Let's go to the palate. Cheers. So the first thing I should say here is that, yes, the heat does translate from the nose to the palate. I think there's a line of when something becomes undrinkably hot, and I don't think this has quite crossed that line at this point. A lot of people, like I said, that are chasing high proof experiences are going to absolutely love this because this is really intense. Other people might think, again, it's just too hot. They might need ice. They might want a little bit of water, and I can see both sides of that, absolutely. For me, I actually think the heat is helping this whiskey. And that's because I really am finding that this is sort of an off-profile Booker's in a lot of ways. The whole sort of tirade that I went on a little bit earlier about how the rye spice is really coming through because of how alcohol forward this is, how some of those like vanilla notes and a little bit of grassiness and green apple is coming through. I think the heat actually helps with those notes. It's working well together. But at the same time, I mentioned sort of a light and dark dichotomy to this whiskey. All of it is there. I mean, there is a nice, rich underlying caramel sweetness to this. It's almost like caramel drizzle that you would put on a dessert. The milk chocolate is there, the hint of peanut, all the pie crust baking spice notes. And now as I'm getting into the finish here, a really nice oak presence is hanging around. So I think the heat is actually helping this for whatever reason. And I honestly can't believe I'm even saying that. So let's go for a second sip and see how this thing continues to develop here. A little bit more baking spice forward there, a little less vanilla sweetness, but I'm actually starting to get a decent amount of dark fruit at this point. I get a little bit of like candied cherry syrup, almost like you'd put on a snow cone. That kind of a note is in there a little bit, but I'm getting something richer. I'm getting something darker, fruitier that I wasn't really getting on the nose. Almost like a slight hint of dark cherry or plum or something like that. And it's interesting. I mean, as I drink it, it's actually getting darker. The alcohol is dissipating, but all the while that bright presence of all of the rye characteristics and the heat, it's all still there. So like I said, to me, this is seeming like a little bit of an off-profile Booker's for whatever reason. A little bit of, airtime could change this. I might come back to this in a month or two and do like a re-review or bring it onto a live stream and see what's going on. But at this point, I'm here again, like I was with Donahoe's batch. I really like this whiskey. I don't know what it is about cracking open these new Booker's batches, but I hope this one doesn't decline from where it is now. But as far as where it is now, I've got to say it's pretty darn good. So let's go ahead and do a quick comparison now. We're going to put it next to Donahoe's batch, which was, again, the first batch of 2021, coming in at 62.65% as opposed to the 63.95% of the Tagalong batch. So 1.3% difference, not that much. But again, it is about 6 months older. So let's check this one out on the nose now. I won't do a full review, but just a quick nosing, tasting, and then go side by side with Tagalong. Yeah, definitely more tame on the nose right now. Again, I think I mentioned this earlier in the video. This one's gotten a little funky for me, like a wet newspaper note for whatever reason. Getting a good bit of cherry, and then after that, it's just like really sort of sharp baking spice, but definitely flatter, definitely more tame on the nose in terms of alcohol content. Yeah, maybe a little bit of chocolate on this one as well. So I'm going to go ahead and taste Donahoe's now. This batch gives you like a flash of fruit at the beginning, and then it just sort of goes right away. It goes right over to that weird wet newspaper note combined with baking spices and just sort of a, I don't know. To me, it's like an off-putting, slightly bitter profile. And again, I don't really remember that being the case when I first opened this batch. I don't know. I just don't think the airtime has done this one very well. Into the finish here, yeah, definitely get some spice lingering as you would expect. A lot of black pepper and cinnamon on the palate. Little oak quality. But that strange wet newspaper note is hanging around. Let's go side by side very quickly on the nose here. So we'll start with Donahoe's. And now let's go to Tagalong. Yeah, I think Tagalong is a superior batch on the nose. Even with that heat, the vanilla is very inviting here. And I just like those off-profile rye notes that I'm getting from this one. So one more sip here of the Tagalong, and then we're going to wrap this up. Well, I think I have everything I need from this. Unfortunately, Donahoe's batch is moving back a few points from me. And Tagalong batch, in my opinion, might be one of the best batches of the last 5 that have been released. Basically from 2020 until now, I think it is a very solid batch. You're going to have to like that alcohol content in there. I don't know how it does over ice. With a little bit of water, I will let you know. I did add some water last night. It sweetened it up a little bit. It gave me a slight coconut note and a very slight tropical fruit, pineapple type note. Kind of interesting for a Booker's, but that's what I got when I added some water and continued proofing it down. But by and large, I think drinking this neat and getting past that ethanol is the way to go, because you get this amazing, sort of combination of these light off-profile flavors with a nice solid Booker's foundation that's not too peanut heavy and that actually has a little bit more dark fruit than I would have expected from a batch that's this young and from a batch that came off the way it did at first. If you find this Booker's batch, I would say pick it up if you can find it at MSRP. Around here, the price is increasing. Unfortunately, it's at $90 plus tax. I don't know if any Booker's batch is really worth that nowadays. But if you can find this close to MSRP, if you're a fan of Booker's, and if you're a fan of high proof, in your face whiskeys, that's very, very important here, then go for it. But again, if you're somebody who wants a very balanced, approachable sipping whiskey, and you're not really looking for something to kind of tear your face off, you might consider this to be a hot mess. I could honestly be in both camps myself. I'm trying to appreciate this thing for what it is, and I think for what it does here, I think it's an overall positive for bookers, and I'm going to be curious to see how the rest of the releases in 2021 hold up. So if you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, check out the Patreon if you want some exclusive behind the scenes content and you want to help support the channel. I do live streams every Thursday night. Check those out. Hit that bell notification button. Turn on all notifications to find out, when I'm dropping new content and everything like that. Otherwise, I'm going to get out of here. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'm going to go ahead and wrap the video up with this final pour of Tagalong Batch. So cheers, and I'll see you next time here on Drums and Drams.